Hello everyone, today we make a documentary video about the military service owed to the Kingdom of Jerusalem as recorded before 1265 by Jean of Ibelin, Count of Jaffa and Ascalon, a noted jurist and in fact the author of the longest legal treatise from the Kingdom of Jerusalem, in which he discusses in detail the so-called Assizes of Jerusalem, so a collection of numerous medieval legal treatises written in Old French containing the law, the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, and the Kingdom of Cyprus, to which Jean was connected, and the procedure of the Haute Cour, the High Court, including details about the ecclesiastical and baronial structure of the kingdom, as well as the number of knights owed to the crown by each of the kingdom's vassals. And this document is really extraordinary because it's a list, in fact, of the knightly and also sergeant service owed to the crown in the time of King Baldwin IV, therefore sometime between 1174 and 1185. And there is a philological background to this because we have several versions of this list, at least the ones surviving, and there are thus, unavoidably for such documents, certain discrepancies which we will consider today. Different versions give different numbers, and there is especially the most important rewriting of this list by Marino Sanudo the Elder, who was an Italian man of letters, geographer, and traveler that in fact was interested in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. He wrote also a history of Morea that was published eventually in Germany during the 15th century. Marino Sanudo is actually from the end of the 13th century, the beginning of the 14th, so actually not much later than Jean, who died in 1266. He had been born in 1215, and there are significant differences, in fact, with this Venetian account, but it's still important because sometimes it confirms the let's say the philological reconstruction as opposed to other sources that miswrote the numbers and or missed some information. Like Sanudo, who evidently was working on Jean of Ibelin's work, because this was very famous in Europe at the time. It was very useful, as you understand. Besides, probably involuntarily at that point, we presume to omit it. Although I don't think we know exactly what the sources of Sanudo are, but anyhow. So you can read the Ibelin's Livre des Assises de la Haute Cour from the first volume of the Recueil des historiens de Croisade by Lois, published in 1841, and there are also more modernly printed versions. I don't know if it's probably digitalized, and if you go archive.org you will find it. So we start from the night service, and it's a list, as we will see. So we will basically list how much all the various fiefs of the Kingdom of Jerusalem were owed in terms of nightly service, and the differences that we have regarding essentially the number of knights, because this is what the list accounts, from the various sources. So we start with the barony of the Count of Jaffa and Ascalon, including Ramla, Mirabel, and Ibelin, so where Jean actually ruled. Owing 100 knights, there is one version giving an unlikely figure of 500. So by knights here we really mean the heavier cavalrymen, And we made videos about the Kingdom of Jerusalem military organization, the Crusader states, perhaps not specifically in the habitual series about that topic, but we will make videos regarding that as well, and you know how normally short of manpower the Crusader states really were, right? The elite was, as always, very good, but very few. And the greater problem of the Crusader states at this point, heading, as you know, towards the defeat of Athens, about which we made a video, and the loss of the same Jerusalem, was the lack of effective permanent forces from the wall of the Crusaders that went for one season to the Holy Land and then came back to Europe thinking to have fulfilled their duty fundamentally. And instead, the great political organizational problem in Jerusalem that frankly had an enormous potential politically, strategically, and could have easily survived, right? But was in fact in the hands of these feudatories, these vassals, and we can see, in fact, in detail how much they were owed. Again, we're talking about the 70s, the 80s of the 12th century. So Jaffa 25 knights, Ascalon 25, Ramla and Mirabel 40, Ibelin 10. The barony of the Prince of Galilee owed 100 knights, and the same other version, like the above, says 500. Again, unlikely. 500 knights was enormous, like just for a single fief that just could not be sustained from a political, social point of view. They hardly had probably even the material to put together for this knightly force. But it's still an important fief, right? That's why also they are listed in somewhat order of importance. The lands to the east of the river Jordan owed 60 knights. One version says 40. The lands west of the river Jordan, 40 knights. The Baron of Sidon, including Beaufort, Caesarea, and Bézannes, owed 100 knights. Again, that other version says 500. Sanudo does not list this barony at all, interestingly, and it goes with Sidon and Beaufort with 60 knights, Caesarea 25, and Bézannes with 15. The seigneury of Kerak, Montreal, and Hebron owed 60 knights. Thus, Kerak and Montreal, so this is the Transjordania, 40 knights, and Hebron 20. The seigneury of the Count Joscelin owed 24 knights. Another version says 50. That is all more than double. Thus subdivided the Chateau du Rey, literally Milia, 4 knights. Saint George, that is Lydda, 10. The lands of Geoffroy-le-Tour, 6 knights. The lands of Philippe Leroux, 2. And the Chamberlain, 2. Then there is a list of the knightly service, quote, which the bishops of the kingdom of Jerusalem owed. Right, you know that the kingdom of Jerusalem had an important grip on the local church that was surely powerful, but under this, well framed under this feudal hierarchy and functionalized the military needs, the constant military needs of the realm. And in one version you find such knights of the bishops, the episcopal force of the kingdom, as part of the seigneury of the Count Joscelin as well. Sanudo does not talk about them. In any case, in the, say, reconstructed version would be the Bishop of St. George of Lydda, 10 knights. The Archbishop of Nazareth, 6. One version says 10. Then the seigneury of Toron and Maron, 18 knights. One version says 15. Toron 15 and Maron 3. Ibelin then moves to the knightly service owed by the cities of the kingdom. So these were, as the Mediterranean was generally more urbanized, and there were lots of money thieves also connected to properly the control of cities, towns. We have seen it, and I don't remember which video really, because again we lack this specific one on the Kingdom of Jerusalem army organization, but we surely discussed already a bit these quantities already. So these cities include naturally Jerusalem, it was largest, and the capital, the Nablus, Acre, and Daron, that were comprised in the royal domain at this time. So there was a direct control of the Kingdom of Jerusalem on the city's nightly service, the main city's nightly service in the kingdom. The service which, quote, the Holy City of Jerusalem owes is 41 nights. There are 3 different versions stating 43. Not a big deal. Sanudo says 41 too. And so subdivided. So, and here there are properly names of the single lords. Say, or people that were, as you understand, these are practically noblemen, having likely control, in fact, on some fiefs corresponding to households, quarters of Jerusalem, and so affording, the wealth, as the important city was. Think about all the, it was a huge market, sensational pilgrimage destination, so the most important city in Palestine. So the city was partitioned among these owners that owed service to the king that had involved them in this public domain. So Laurent de Franc-Luc, 4 nights, Ansel Babin, 5, the wife of Jean Commun. This is interesting because there were naturally some dames that were widowed and or however managed to maintain, because of their status, their lineage, a certain power and grip on these realities, and managed their considering that their relatives were often overseas because they were in Europe, and so they could not immediately arrive to the Holy Land, so the women were entrusted much of this kind of power. This is to be seen also in some places in Europe, right? That some matriarchs in a way managed to remain in power at the end of their husbands' lives, and having a great relevance given their blood, their family ties, and so on. So the wife of Jean Commun, 4 nights. Raymond Le Bouffil, 3 nights, 5 in 3 versions. Harry de Mont, 1 night. Nicolas d'Artois, 1. Simon, the son of Peter Lermont, 2 nights. Andrew of the Temple, 2 nights. Peter Dantel, 1. Amalric, the son of Arnold, 3. Baldwin, Baudouin de Saint-Gilles, 3 nights. Simon of Bethlehem, 1. Enguerrand de Pincagny, 2. Lady Gilles, the wife of Jean de Valence, 1 night. Peter Lenoir, 2. Folk Lenoir, 1. Ansel Le Borgne, 1. Hugues Le Petit, 1. The children of Robert de Pancagny, 2. Eustace Patrick, 1. Then for the city of Nablus, that is Neapolis, 85 nights are required to serve the king. One version says 80 nights, another 102. Sanudo gives 85. So subdivided. So the Viscount of Naples, 10 nights, 50 in another version. That is probably the one that multiplied per 5 the first 2 fiefs, say from 100 to 500. So it's unlikely to be correct by far. Then Ranier Rohard and his mother, 8 nights. Jean Bellarnier, 5 nights. Aude Dumerle, 4. the wife of Hugh de Mimar, 4. The wife of Baldwin le Prince, 3. The wife of Raymond, 1. Jean de Saint-Bertin, 1. And 3 knights, actually in 4 versions. Constantine, the brother of Raymond, 1. William le Queux, 1. Henry, the son of Guy, 1. The wife of Baldwin of Paris, 1. Isaac de la Pessin, 1. Roger Lannes, 1. Aubrey de Roy, 2. Bernard Fouché, 1. Richard of Nazareth, 1. Raymond Babin, 1. Baldwin de Rotrine, 1. The wife of Robert Salib, 1. The wife of Michel Legrand, 1. Gérard Passerelle, 1. Baudouin d'Ibelin, 4. The Lady of Caesarea, 2. Henry the Crossbowman, 1. Guy of Naples, 1. Arnold of Tripoli, 1. Renald de Soissons, 1. Amaury de Londres, 1. Philip of Nazareth, 1. Georges l'Écrivain, 1. Balian of Ibelin, quote, for the land which he holds in Nablus, 15. It's in here, probably there was also some extra information that the Ibelin could add, because they knew better. Simon de Darien, 2. Here, I'm reading a list that has anglicized the names. These are basically almost all French. So it's interesting to see, of course, these titles that are fascinating. I mean, who was not fascinated by the Lady of Caesarea, or by you see here Henry the Crossbowman. Like who knows who this guy was? Maybe he was, he was a knight himself, but maybe this guy was obsessed with crossbows, or maybe he produced some, or also George the clerk here. So you find people that were civilized, that they lived in the cities, they had some business going on, and they were rich enough to provide with this military service. It was not necessarily their own in person, right? They could pay for all these knights that were required. And this is just the knights, by the way. We will see how there is also the sergeant list, but we just observe these because the list goes in this order. Now, the city, or also known as Signory in one version of Acre, owed 80 knights to the Kingdom of Jerusalem. 3 versions say 72 knights. Sanudo, who calls Acre by its classical name of Ptolemais, also says 80, subdivided in this fashion. Now, the Constable of Acre, that was Amaury de Lusignan, 10 knights. Balian of Jaffa, the Chamberlain, 7 knights, 6 in one version. Pagan of Haifa, 7 knights. Raymond de Scandalion, 7 knights. Philippe Leroux, 1. The wife of Aude, 2. Gérard Épinal, 1. Lady Gilles, 3. William de Molenbeek, 2. The wife of William of Antioch, 1. Walter of Saint-Denis, 2. Robert Tabor, 1. Raoul of Nazareth, 1. Simon de Moulins, 1. The Count Joscelin, 1. Jordan de Terremonde, 1. Michael of Mount Sinai, 1. Dreux, the brother of Gilbert de Flore, 1. Walter of Blanchegarde, 9 knights, of whom Arnaud de Brie supplies 1. The wife of Adam Coste, 1. Walter Lebel, 1. Aude de la Midi, 1. Gas, the son of Robert, 1. Gilles de Calavatrie, 4. The Seneschal, 3 or 4 in one version. Castran Benoit, 2. Arnaud de Diffoy, 1. The Viscount Guillaume de Flore, 1. Jordan Arenc, 1. Jean d'Aran, 1. Here you see some that this is even familial ties. This is the brother of this guy, this is the wife of that guy, and that speaks again how entrenched these people were in the local communities. They lorded over, and you find here this one guy, Walter Blanchegard, that owes 9, which is a lot considering the constable Omery de Lusignan owed 10 knights. But there is one other guy, this Arnaud de Brie, that supplies 1 for him, and we don't know what was behind that, why these people were associated like this, but they had agreed like it. And consider that these lists derive from the Assizes of the kingdom. So these things were basically decided on the basis of the feudal council of Jerusalem, where more or less everybody knew each other, or at least they knew all together all the various vassals of the kingdom, and all these people were associated with their, they were essentially their clientele, or associated with them, and thus were recorded to owe the specific services. And of course, it would be some kind of head, to see the constable, the lord, the viscount of the cities. It would say, okay, well, we know what our city is about. We can't say that these specific guys will send these forces, but then they would kind of organize the thing also more flexibly. And of course, all these services were owed at that point, kind of in history. They could vary importantly because there were crusaders. As you see, all these wives here were widowed for just natural reasons. Women usually married very, very young, and their husbands were often old, but these were lords, knights themselves, so that they also fought, they also lived dangerous lives, they would die more easily. So you see other crusaders could come from overseas in the meanwhile to eventually take the reins. Their deceased relatives, for example, or there were other people who were involved in the meanwhile. You see, again, these titles of people that do not sound necessarily even as noblemen, but that factually were rich enough, and this is especially true for the city thieves that owed this service. Going on with the list, the city or seigneury, depending on the versions, of Tyre, owing 28 knights to the king of Jerusalem, 25 in one version, thus subdivided. So the Venetians that had, as we've seen, that these were the Italian porters of the city that were subcontracted by the kingdom, owed 3 knights, interestingly enough. So it was the share. Okay, you wanted to trade, this man were there, they could provide for with their forces, noblemen, mercenaries, whatever. One version says just 1 knight. Simon de Marigny, 3 knights, in one version. The wife of Guillaume le Grand, 2 knights. The wife of Gilbert Vernier, 1 knight. Fulk de la Falaise, 2. Ansel, the son of Charles, 1. Gérard Gazelle, 2. Henri de Machelin, 1. Adam of Arsouf, 1. Denis, the son of Geoffroy, 1. Raoul de Bouteiller, 2. Roger Sauvery, 7. Simon de Moulin, 1. Roger Legaz, 1. And again, the easygoing thing, that guy, everybody knows Denis, the son of Geoffroy, right? You didn't need ID cards at the time to know, the bosses were fundamental. Then there is the city or seigneury or daron. This is relatively modest. It owes only 2 knights that are provided, one by Gérard de Douai and one by Reinald of Montgisard. The city or seigneury, again in the sources, of Beirut owes 21 knights, but we don't have the details. Nor Darren nor Beirut appear in Sanudo's list either. Maybe he just eluded them because he didn't have the list of the knights. It's not vital to enter in Sanudo's philological critique, but say that's also the kind of motivations could have brought here. So when Ibelin drew this list, he made his own calculation, which adds up to 577 knights. Now, other versions give 1 567, 2 677, and 3 666, while Sanudo, who, as we've seen, omits several figures, gives 518. However, he also makes arithmetic mistakes. For example, Nablus in his list adds up to only 81, Acre to 76, and so his sum total is wrong in the first place. And so if you make this calculation, you arrive at 675. Modern historiography, such as Smail in his Crusading Warfare, tries to trace a minimum at least, and this would account for 647. But if you count each minimum total, for example, 40 instead of 60 for Eastern Galilee, 15 instead of 18 for Toron/Maron, 80 instead of 85 for Nablus, 72 instead of 80 for Acre, and 25 instead of 28 for Tyre, you have a possible minimum as low as 636. If you instead take the highest figure, except the aforementioned impossibility of the 500 knights of the 3 great baronies that simply were not there, right? We know from the total of the kingdom's military capacities and services, etc., it would have been a miracle in the first place, which in the Holy Land may happen, it's defied the laws of physics, but it's not quite the case. It's a mistake of the author. Well, you have 15 instead of 24 for example, the Count Joscelin, 10 instead of 6 for Nazareth, 43 instead of 41 for Jerusalem. So all these kind of, as we've seen, different versions that point to the highest. 127 instead of 85 for Nablus, including 50 instead of 10 for the Viscount, which, however, is also the incredible multiplication per 5. But in any case, you can reach up to 749, right? Always considering that these figures are incomplete in the first place. Some data is not provided, not all the fiefs are listed. Jean Dibelin, for example, admits himself his lack of knight service data for Banias and Subaibe, which are not even properly counted. And the reason being that at the time they had already been captured by Nur ed-Din in 1164 specifically. The same goes for Chateau Neuf, and we know that other fiefs, such as Arsuf, for example, owed 6 knights and 21 sergeants. That is 16.5 knights practically in 1261, because we could exchange sometimes the same amount of. There was an equivalence between knights and sergeant that you could somewhat use to send either one or the other type of trooper. Also is not recorded here. So again, it's not the grand total, but it still shows, an interesting segmentation of the distribution of all these service requirements. And passing to the sergeants, we see that this specific type of trooper seems to have been owed only by church lands and the burgesses of the cities. This is interesting because it points at some sort of demilitarization, or at least lower military quality, or properly type of business of management of these properties, these assets, that wouldn't properly support a knightly training per se. And like the list of knight service, it's almost certainly incomplete. As well, we know, for example, that the Magna Maomeria provided 65 quote light armed youths, so undoubtedly a contingent of sergeants at Gaza in 1170. So reading Jean d'Ibelin lists we have of the sergeants: the Patriarch of Jerusalem 500, the chapter of the Holy Sepulchre 500. Sanudo interestingly says about these just 5, not 500. The Abbey of St. Mary of Jehoshaphat 150, the Abbey of Mount Sion 150, the Abbey of the Mount of Olives 50. Three versions say 150. Sanudo does not list this service. The Templum Domini 50 sergeants. Three versions say 150 again, and Sanudo 2. The Latina 50. The Bishop of Tiberias 100. 500 in two versions. This is perhaps also not entirely correct. The Abbey of Mount Tabor 100, and again 500 in two other versions. The City of Jerusalem 500. The City of Acre 500. The City of Tyre 100. The City of Nablus 300. The City of Caesarea 50. The Bishop of Bethlehem 200. Ramla, Mirabel, and Ibelin 150. So these are Jean's holdings. Sanudo says 100, interestingly. The Bishop of St. George of Lydda 200, Arsu 50, the Bishop of Sebastia 100, 500 in two versions, 150 in another, the Bishop of Acre 150, 550 in another version, the Bishop of Hebron 50, 550 in one version, the Archbishop of Tyre 150, the Archbishop of Nazareth 150, and the latter is not listed in two versions, and Sanudo says 50 instead about it. The Bishop of Sidon 50, the Archbishop of Caesarea 50, but one version does not list it. Ascalon 150, 100 in three versions and in Sanudo 2. Jaffa 100, not listed in three versions nor in Sanudo. Le Lion, that is Le One in Sanudo 100. Le Gérard, also we don't know about the last two, the actual quantity, but Lerem in Sanudo gives 25, Ifa 50, and Tiberias 200 as cities. So this list is quite interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, you see that there is objectively a disproportion compared to knightly service as far as the properly the ecclesiastical fiefs are concerned. They have to provide much more sergeants compared to the lay holdings, let's say. There is still a divide between the diocese and the city, so that you find, for example, the Patriarch of Jerusalem owes 500 sergeants, and the city of Jerusalem are 500. These figures are kind of plausible. The other ones that multiply for 5 per 10 are not so. At least the versions, particularly Judas, probably are not reliable. Sergeants were not just throwaway troops, right? They had to be consistently equipped as well. They were very important for the nightly deployment in the first place on the battlefield. were still mounted troops, and they had to be sustained also in this imported numbers, the animals, etc. So it's an interesting amount of troops that shows also how these lighter ones were probably the most active all around the kingdom, especially in frontier warfare. And these people were just normally employed in the regular violence of those times and places, because these were men of war and were another, and they would have always to cope with a violent world, keeping order, which was in fact maintained also through their deterrent force locally. You see that there is a preeminence naturally of cities here, so naturally many of these troops were levied from the surrounding countryside, but they were still somewhat framed under the city holdings. I don't see here, we don't have personal names like the additional list, because these people were kind of more dependent, especially on the aforementioned lords and knights, so we don't know their names and all, who raised them specifically, at least from this list. And in this instance, differently from the knights, Jean d'Ibelin adds up his figures correctly to a total of 5,025 sergeants, right? So altogether, we see, at least for what was in possession of Jean, informationally speaking, something like 600, 700 knights and something like 5,000 sergeants, which is an interesting segmentation, telling the truth. It probably leaves out, in fact, some knight, I would say. Normally the segmentation wasn't like that in Europe. You hardly find all this greater amount of sergeants, even though it could have been 2, 3, 4 times more. We also don't know exactly, as always in medieval warfare, how these soldiers were practically armed and equipped like. We have made several videos about the Crusades and noticed how crusading warfare, especially, how there was perhaps some kind of lighter nature of Western knights and sergeants and troops in general in the East, because of environmental reasons, but also the nature of the enemy warfare that was somehow needing that greater flexibility, and also probably some sort of lighter equipment. And as such, it's possible that these troops, as an occupation force by some degree, even though especially most of the sergeants were probably from the local, from also local troops, right? They were not just like the Turcopoles, that were probably something that was becoming ever more specialized as a different type of force. But everybody was hireable, let's say, especially given the aforementioned chronic lack in manpower. And as a consequence, it's also plausible that local troops would provide with some kind of more adapted type of lighter warfare. As again, the same knights could fight like, right? This doesn't mean that they were necessarily locals from an ethnic point of view. The Western knights could easily transform themselves, even in literal Turcopoles, as we know from the sources. And we are still in a phase in Western warfare in which you have the Milas really hegemonizing most of probably the tactical situation. And so we're talking mostly about mounted warfare in general, and we don't see much of another segmentation here. We don't have, for example, the figures of infantry, which is also relevant, nor any hint about the possible segmentation between, for example, missile troops and so on. Probably among these sergeants and even knights were, bow-equipped troopers, right? It would have been not strange, right? As a side weapon, and in any case, everybody knew how to use one efficiently. One version that we have miscounts the 5025 as 5175. This is not so important. Other figures, because the arithmetic is wrong. Other versions instead of the ones we listed also add up variant figures such as 4975, 5075, 6125, and 7025. And three versions give their own totals inaccurately, however, as 7,075. Sanudo's total is 4,280. So it's still like the nightly list, much lower than the original version, and probably all these other ones that were either miscopied or whatever. So again, Sanudo makes his own choice, and it's probably not particularly reliable. And what do we get from this list? Well, we have an interesting segmentation of the type, in fact, of military service that was owed, which communities, to which people, especially, the aristocracy in general. We can see this urban environment that is surely stronger than the Western average, that is mostly feudal and rural at this point. Naturally, most of these possessions entail the countryside connection, but there is also a lot of properly city-based powers here, some of which are properly part of the, as we've seen, the royal domain. Also, the ecclesiastical institutions are firmly within that control, the royal control that the Kingdom of Jerusalem had managed to retain after the First Crusade. We see this interesting and apparent disproportion between knights and sergeants in favor of the latter, numerically speaking, which could again have something to do with a type of lighter type of warfare, in fact, that the Westerners had adapted to in the Near East, but this is yet to be seen. This is also kind of a dispositive source, as you understand. Here, it's how much is owed properly by feudal contract, let's say, with the monarchy, which doesn't mean that all of these troops would have been readily available at any moment. I mean, the objective was that, of course, and there could be also, as it would happen, a general levy of the entire forces of the realm. But as for it's valid for many other lists of knights and other troops for the Western European kingdoms, we just look at a potential, right? It's something that would be called, for example, on a rota basis, and or because depending also heavily on the theaters of operation, right? The Jerusalemetan nobility was very much quarreling, as you know. If a war, an expedition entailed of course, as always, one direction or another compared to the kingdom's boundaries. Well, this had important consequences for the various fiefs. Some of these people would just not be, they had some margin of, say, disobedience, say, that had to be taken in consideration by the king. And also some troops were connected probably more or less with the defense of certain specific areas, right? Depending on how more or less exposed they were to the frontier. For example, we have seen very small fiefs of just 2 knights, right? So in that case, depending on where they were in the frontier, lots could change, or maybe for them, they the entire fate of their fief depended on the broader expedition. So this depended always on the political situation, and we can't really trace it most of the times. We see great importance of the cities, as we were saying before, and an important reliance on them as well from this essentially feudal system of recruitment. Some of these fiefs were also somewhat monetized, and we've seen just at least this list has a very small evidence of, for example, what was owed to, let's say, by the Italians, by those crusaders that were just coming and offering their services. Right, this may be one reason why, for example, this we have this numerical disproportion between knights and sergeants, because perhaps the Holy Land was routinely visited by a certain amount of knights, and so the local forces could be less squeezed in the process, as these men were still to perform some sort of military duty together with the pilgrimage to the holy places. And there were also other troops that here we don't see, mercenaries, other ad hoc recruited forces. We don't have the infantry. So this document shouldn't be taken as literally an image of what the Earls of Limitan army really was altogether, but it kind of gives a hint of what the core of it was like, right? What the most important knightly and sergeant service really was, and around this, right, revolved a bit the entire military system, because if you secured these forces, you could just add to them with this other means that we listed, and it's obvious that these forces sometimes could be increased also by other troops, by the local lords. I mean, here what we see is how much was owed to the king, not how much these men really controlled by themselves. It was surely more. And they had their own coercive capacities against the natives, and this other connection they had with each other, for not talking about the other crusader states, and more, right? Other international relations and so on. So it's actually a very interesting source. It tells you how much towards the end of the crusading era in the Near East, still there was an interest in this sense. It's a bit a juridical one, but also historical in nature. You realize that Jean of Ibelin drew these data from some broader accounts that he could access, even just as a vassal of the kingdom of Jerusalem, in a moment in which, by the way, Jerusalem was not there anymore. I mean, most was conquered by the Muslims. Acre would have fallen less than 30 years from then, right? And this document was written just probably before Jean's death in 1266. So we are in a phase of advanced decay of the Outremer states, but still these documents were available, right? It was a connection also with the kingdom of Cyprus, which also Jean was vassal, and it's evident that this almost antiquarian interest towards what was happening 100 years before, at the height of the same kingdom, really was interesting for these men. For they were knights, but also men of letter now, and there was a specific interest in this, again, ancient military potential that could be preserved, and was probably a matter of pride for those who have these families that were historically involved with the kingdom. And this is the sake that we can I guess, express on this document. The rest we more or less commented on, so I don't think there is much else to repeat. We will, of course, extend our crusading history series that is from years now part of the channel. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time.